Well, hello, this is Peter Combs from P.O. Combs Asian Art and Bidamount.com. And today is November 24th, 2017, the day after Thanksgiving. And we're going to take the weekly look back at last week's eBay auction results. Some pretty good buys last week. I think everybody was away on vacation or traveling to visit family for the holidays. At any rate, some good purchases were made. And the other thing I wanted to point out was that don't forget that Bonhams has a sale coming up on the 28th of this month in Hong Kong. There's a good catalog is out. It's on the website under Dealers and Auctioneers, as always. You can find it there. Click it, open it, and have a look. Alrighty, and before we get going, I want to say thank you to many of you that sent a little money to our friend Everest Crawford, who's getting ready to go to Nepal to do his documentary on the school that was built by a fellow named Sedum Sherpa. He's a good friend of Everest and his family. Everest was named Everest because of their relationship to Nepal and Mount Everest. And it was built at Namche Bazaar by a fellow named Sedum. He's still trying to raise some money. He hasn't gotten to his goal yet, but some of you were good enough to send over some cash to give him a hand. I can only say the idea is to do the documentary to get the word out about this school. It's grown from 5 kids to 85 kids in less than 7 years. And these are kids that will never go to school otherwise, and I mean never. The government doesn't pay for any of this. This is all paid for by this one guy by donations and helping, doing what he can to help his village. And if you can donate $10 or $20. Come over here to the Bidamount blog. Now there's a story about it, and there's a link to the donation. It's painless, and send him $10 or $20. So if everybody did that, he'd hit his goal, and he won't have to borrow any money to complete his project. He's doing this as a college project. And it's a very important thing. So if you can do anything and you haven't had a chance yet, please come over and send him a little money. All right? He's going to be away for the holidays, and he's going to be working. So please do that. Thank you. All right, now let's get on to eBay. All right, last weekend, these closed out. There was a nice-looking couple of brush pots here. There are a couple of little nicks and whatnot, but they're Famille Rose. They were both late 19th century pots. Nicely done, a square slab constructed one with this relief work and calligraphy, and this one with calligraphy. They both had lots of calligraphy on them, and calligraphy make brush pots for the Scholars Table very desirable. And these did pretty well. They brought $1,040, and the square one had an old repair to the foot on the inside. In case you took a look at it, you'll remember. And then there was this fan, nice-looking Chinese export fan, very typical of the 1830, 1840 period. Here's a shot of it up close, good quality, nicely done watercolor with these black lacquer and gilt work framing around it. Here it is. Here's the other side of it. This is actually the front of the fan, where you have figures in both sections, upper and lower, but beautiful quality. And it did pretty well. It brought $820. Had it had the box, I suspect it probably would have brought $1,100. But nice looking fan. And then there was this pair of Kongs, Celadon Kongs, late 19th, early 20th century Kongs, but beautiful quality. And they had Yongshen marks on them. And what hurt them a little bit in the value was the fact that they were drilled. The bottoms were knocked out for someone to make them into lamps. And as you can see, they're marked made in China. And that doesn't mean when these were made, because this label was put on basically by law. There was of anything after 1895 that was exported from China had to be marked with country of origin. So I suspect this pair of vases were made before that, judging by this foot rim and the glaze and so forth. Probably made during the Guangxu period, but before 1895. And there they are. And these were a pretty good buy. I thought they'd bring maybe $3,000, $4,000. They went for $810. I suspect the holiday had a hand in why they didn't bring as much as they should have. But this was a very good buy for somebody. This pair of vases, good going. And then there was this nice-looking Kangxi vase with a later European silver mount. The rim here is attached to the lid, and this goes around the collar. But beautiful dark blue cobalt on this. Nice quality decoration. Here's the bottom with the artisanal leaf, and this sort of, often these pieces with this, take a look back here for a second. When you see these slightly flared out feet on the bottoms of these, like you have here, when you look inside, you'll see they're slightly stepped sometimes. They sort of step down, pretty typical. And this was a nice one, about $716, which is right in the price range you typically expect to see for these, between $650 and $1,100 or $1,200 if they're a little bit bigger. So that was a perfectly reasonable buy for someone. And then we had this came along. This was nice. It was a Guangzhou Market Period object bowl with a dragon on it, drawn onto it. I love the dragon. He looks almost like a chess piece. And but the entire rim of the bowl is done with different types of vases with handles on them and different objects and peacock feathers and whatnot coming out of the tops of them. Very pretty. And here's the bottom of it. Nice looking mark on there. The foot looks good. The base splays out slightly. And it did pretty well. It brought $510. And I think that was also a bit under the money. I thought this might have brought $700 to $1,000. And then we had the big Famille Rose. This was about a 16, 17-inch vase on blue enamel ground with these rose mandarin figures and 3 cartouches going up each side. And the vase had, so if we can find, there it is, gilt Foulon mask handles with rings. Very, very well-known style. And but the vase was sort of nicely shaped. And it didn't bring the world. It did fine. It brought $825, which is probably about in line with exactly where it should be, because a pair of these would bring a bit more, because pairs are worth more than singles. But a nice-looking vase. And then there was this brush washer, this brush pot, water pot. Nice-looking flambe glaze on it. Good color. I like the way it was so evenly applied and this nice white rim to contrast it. And the bottom of it looks pretty much the way these all do. You can see where some of the glaze on these later 19th century pieces tended to have the glaze run down and stick to the bottom like this, and they'd grind them off. You can see how they did that. Sort of a giveaway for late pieces. And you can see here that it looks like maybe they took off some of this glaze and it pulled out a little bit of the paste at the same time. So at any rate, it was a nice looking thing, and it brought $570. And there's another piece of this type also in this upcoming week's newsletter, so you might want to check that out. This might act as guidance for value. And this, I think, was one of the great buys of the week. This was a very attractive silk, early 19th century silk, that with a horse and rider, with kids riding horses and whatnot, that was put up by Gruen and Gruen. He's a carpet man over in Europe. But he has a good eye for textiles and color, and he put these up, this up. This was a really nice early textile, I think. Here it is. And I think this went for nothing. I think this was maybe one of the best buys of the week. And I love the kid with the banner over the boy on the horse. It's a great scene. It would be fabulous framed. And look at this. It went for $143. I can't say it often enough. If you see something you like, but you think it's going to go for too much, throw a bid on it anyway. Give it a shot, because you never know. This was a very good buy. And then there was this bowl. This is a type of bowl we've all seen fairly regularly, but a sort of unusual ground color with yellow borders and rue heads in the bottom with a Greek key border, and you have these nice phoenixes. This was a good 19th century bowl. You can see there's that typical interior wear from a plant or something being in it. Here's the bottom of it with an apocryphal chin lung mark, but a nice looking bowl nonetheless, with a nice foot on it. There it is. And it went very reasonably, $102. And I know there are people out there that collect these. This was a bargain. Okay, and then there was this piece was marked chin lung. It's not chin lung, but beautifully done with the guardian figure standing, here with the rocks and the blossoming trees, and then the ascending bats over the boys at the fish tank here. And they're playing, and he's looking down on them, sort of keeping an eye on them. Here's the back of the dish. Nice looking dish. I don't think it was 18th century. It could possibly be, but I don't think it is. I think it's later. And it did very well. It brought $632, which is a pretty reasonable price for that, I think. All right. And then there was the aubergine incense burner. Aubergine is a rather unusual color. This is an 18th century one. Some people thought it might be Kangxi. Here it is. It has a tiny little rim nick. But aubergine pieces in porcelain from the 18th century are pretty unusual and very attractive. Usually you see turquoise more often than you see aubergine. but this was a good-looking piece, and it did just fine. It brought $1,247. Not much of a surprise there. Again, with incense burners, table objects, scholars' objects, it's always a market, always a market. And then there was this very pretty, we'll get a better picture of it here, sterling silver box with Buddhist emblems around the top, signed on the bottom here in the middle. Here's a better picture of the signature. All right, just a nice looking box, and it did very well. It brought $735, good quality, small box though, like 3 or 4 inches in diameter. And then there's this Bangkarong bowl for the Tibetan market. Nicely done, good colors. You see these bowls are sort of characteristic with their reds and blacks and then yellows, and nicely done. Here's a picture of the interior. The interior was well finished. Love the turquoise ground in there. Here's the foot, white, nicely done foot. This is an early one, 18th, early 19th century. And it did pretty well. It brought $175, but it could have brought a lot more. It didn't do terrific, but these pieces seem to come and go in popularity, and maybe right now they're on the outs a little bit, but did just fine no matter what. And then there was the Ming dish. This Ming dish, this is a very well-known pattern. This particular pattern lasted well into the 18th century, with the rocky outcropping and the pagoda and the figures on the bridge, with a boat in the background, and then this nice aquatic rim, this flattened rim with aquatic plants and birds and so forth. There's the back of it. Very, very typical late Ming foot right there. And this is a nice dish. And it went for a reasonable price. If you're a collector, this was a good buy. $374 for that. It's a lot of art, beautifully drawn, very classical. Nice looking thing. And then there was this, the Famille June ground with grisaille decorated opposing dragons over a chrysanthemum with these white flowers, and then contrasted by a powder blue ground with Famille rose, and then surmounted by a couple of chimeras. Very typical moon flask, nice color combination. There's the foot. And it did fine. It brought $695, which is about right, because if you had a pair of these, they probably would have brought an extra $300 or $400 all in for a pair. So, $695 for a single, and a pair of them would probably bring $1,500 to $1,800, because the pairs are just more desirable. But a very pretty vase, nonetheless. And then we had this 18th century leaf form or scallop form dish, scallop-shaped dish. Rather nice cobalt blue. The seller had a few of them up. This was just one of them. And one of the things to note on these is you don't see spur marks very often on the backs of Chinese things. You do on occasionally on wall pockets, things with flat backs, and they need to put some spurs on there to keep it off the ground while it's being fired. And they put them on here because the back of this is intended to be glazed, and they don't want any gunk getting on here, so they did spur them up. And there is the another view of it right here, and it did okay. But these dishes these used to sell for $250, $300, $350 have come down a bit. This was $158, and the seller had several of them up, so maybe one person got to buy them all for a reasonable price. And then we have this cut corner bowl, 18th century, done with what they refer to as a stock pattern. You see the same pattern on tea sets, plates, and so forth. It's sort of a medium range price pattern when they were ordering them. It doesn't have a lot of border work on it, but a very charming scene. Typical Chinese daily life scene. There it is. And it did all right. It brought $550. What's interesting is that particular bowl is more often seen with in Fitzhugh or in cobalt. So that was sort of curious to see it that way. And then there was this sleeve vase, this little sleeve vase in lacquer, carved lacquer. On this side is a vase, Meiping vase on a display table, and in the background is a root table with a plant on top of it coming out. And then on the other side of it is a late 19th century Ming type incense table with a pine tree and a planter on top of it, with a gu form vase with flowers coming out, also on another table for display. The seller had this down as 17th or 18th century. The problem is that it has a Qianlong mark on it, so it obviously can't be 17th century. And I don't think it was actually a Qianlong piece. I have my doubts about it for a few reasons. One is the quality, the way the foot is done and so forth. But I think it was probably a 19th century pot done in that way. There's a bear to crackle in here, but my gut says it's a 19th century piece. But it did fine. It brought $787, a nice looking piece. If it had been earlier, it probably would have brought 3-4 times that. And then there was this very pretty pair of these are late cloisonnés, but they're a nice looking pair with these gilt handles on them, and a nice maroon ground with yellows and greens, good contrasting colors, nicely shaped and good size. Okay, and these sort of went through at I think a very reasonable price. It's a lot of decorative bang for the buck. $621 for the two of them, not bad at all. And then there was this Kangxi Celadon incise decorated stem cup. Kangxi stem cups are kind of unusual. You don't see them very often. And this one would have done a lot better than it did if it weren't for this. It had some damage on the inside of the mouth, which turns off a lot of buyers. But if you collect unusual forms or slightly harder to get forms, this was a good chance. And there's a nice looking 18th century foot on here, nice thick glaze here, good looking pot, good looking little cup. And it only went for $135. Okay, that's very inexpensive indeed. And then there's this bladder form vase, probably for the Vietnamese market, with the 2-character mark on the bottom. The way it's done, you'll see it in a second. There it is. And nice looking little pot, though, with a simple dragon chasing around in the clouds against the pearl over here. And it didn't bring the world. It brought $161. Nice piece of 19th century Chinese porcelain for pretty reasonable money. So that was another good buy this week. And this did quite well. This was a very attractive pink glass snuff bottle with green stem overlay and a nice green stopper, floral stopper. And this particular bottle was on the cover of the International Chinese Snuff Bottle Society one year, around 22 years ago. And it did pretty well. It brought $2,700 on the nose. And onto this, if you were a clobber, once in a while I get somebody say, how come there aren't many clobberwares on? Well, here's a good piece of clobberware. This is one of the nicest pieces I've seen in a while. And it is a good, very pretty apple green ground with this nicely contrasting red and gilt work on the handles. But some clobberwares are sort of clumsy. This one is very neatly done. And I like the crosshatch decoration down here at the foot. There's the bottom of it, very typical for a Kangxi piece. And the pot is a nice form, desirable form. And it's pretty good size. Look at the size of it. There it is with a lemon next to it. And it did well. It did well, but it was well worth buying. It brought $1,725. Not bad at all. And then there was this sort of whisk that someone, sort of a whimsical thing that someone had put together using a jade handle and this rather nice clear or blue glass hat finial with these rope twists, which you often see on hats also. This was probably attached to it and they applied the handle. But coral ground ropes, and it did fine. It brought $610. All right. And coming up this week, our friend Josh up in New Hampshire at Chamberlain Antiques is having a sale. He told me it was going to be 200 lots. It ended up being 270. This is one of the pieces in here. I particularly liked this. There's a Jiajing plate, probably Jiajing, I think, with this spotted deer pattern on it with birds and insects and pine trees and all that. And then you notice that the interior cavetto is just left blank. And then when you flip it over, the exterior is decorated very beautifully in the round with a different type of pattern, fruit trees. I think it's a nice thing. You got a collection of Ming porcelain he's selling on here, and this is one of them. And it's only up to $200, which isn't bad. And he also has this Mei Ping vase. I like Mei Ping vases, and I like monochromes, and this is a good-looking one. And it's interesting because it has a very attenuated body coming up. It doesn't taper out early. It sort of luxuriously flows up and then pinches in nicely in this nice rolled mouth on it. And here's the bottom of it, very typical of 18th century work and Kangxi work. And we'll see what it brings. It's probably going to double or more of that number. It's up to $750. Monochrome collectors can go wild over a thing like this, so let's see what happens. And there's this bamboo-handled fan with a painting on silk with a poem on one side, and then extensive rows of script and so forth, and another signature with a seal on the other side. It's not perfect. It has a tiny puncture in it right there, okay, right above the handle. But it's had a bit of interest, so I'm curious to see how it does. It's up to $428. It ends on Sunday. So if you're a fan collector or a painting collector, you might want to check that out. He has another one as well, the same seller, and we'll have it in the newsletter. And then there's this nice mid-green water pot with an aubergine chimera with yellow on it climbing around the top. And then there's on the other side here, so you can see it, is this aubergine and yellow bat. And they're sort of opposing one another, confronting one another. Very attractive. And it's a 19th century one, pretty clearly. And it's right now, it's only up to $67. So if you collect table objects and scholars objects, this is a pretty good buy right now. We'll see where it goes. And then there's this. This is our friend Fiek over in the Netherlands has this up. It's a 1930s Republican vase. It's signed. It's beautifully done. Nice looking calligraphy. Nice mountain landscape. I love the mountains on this and the way they do this. And then the cascades down here with the pine trees. And this very clever light blue mountaintops in the background. I like that. And it's by signed Li Yongxing. And we'll see how it does. It's apparently dated 1931, which was sort of the high watermark for Republican painting, especially sign pieces. And then last coming up is this. This is, I just came across this a little while ago today, is this very pretty Ming bronze. It's about 6 inches tall. It's got these tubular lug handles on the side, sort of like, like you see for arrow vases, and this mask pressed into it, and then a simple body. But it has nice patina on it, and it looks to be a pretty good little pot. There it is. You see a seam going up one side. There's the bottom of it. All right, and we'll see how that does. Right now, it's only up to $21, so could be a relative bargain for someone out there. And that's it for the week. And there's not much else going on. Check out the Bonham sale if you haven't seen it yet. And if you can, send our good friend Everest a couple of bucks to help him on his trip to Nepal. And we'll tell you how you can see the movies when he's done with it. All right. Thanks a bunch, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.